The dust never stopped on Valtara. It swirled and bit and found its way into everything. Lungs, machinery, dreams. 50 years after the corporate wars had officially ended. Their remnants still poisoned the planet, scattered across endless scrapyards like the bones of fallen giants. Jack's harrow pulled his respirator tighter against his face as another gust threatened to blind him. The filter whistled with each labored breath, the sound mixing with a constant hiss of sand against metal. His salvage pack weighed heavy on his shoulders, filled with the day's meager findings, circuitry that might fetch a few credits, power cells still holding a charge, memory crystals that occasionally contained valuable data. Not enough. Never enough. He'd been at this for 6 hours already, and the setting sun cast long shadows across the military junkyard. Most salvagers avoided the old base perimeter. Too many unexploded ordnances, too many automated defense systems still twitching with the last sparks of artificial life. But desperation made Jax bold, or perhaps just foolish. "Last sector," he muttered to himself, the words muffled by his mask. Then back before dark. The corporate wars had been brutal. 12 planetary systems, 7 megacorporations, and countless mercenary units fighting for resources, patents, and market dominance. Valtara had been strategic only for its position, not its value, and the corporations had treated it accordingly. They'd strip-mined what they wanted, fought over transport lanes, and left the planet drowning in toxic dust and military waste when more profitable conflicts emerged elsewhere. Jax had been a data courier then, ferrying information packets too sensitive for digital transmission. He'd survived by being invisible, unremarkable. When the wars ended, he'd kept that skill, disappearing into Valtara's sparse population of scavengers and survivors. No connections, no commitments, no questions about his past, just the daily grind of finding enough value in the debris to keep eating. He crested a hill of compacted metal and stopped. Below him lay what appeared to be an intact dropship, half buried in the rust-colored sand. Its hull was blackened from atmospheric entry, but the crash must have been controlled. The structure remained largely whole. "Well now," he whispered, hope flickering to life. Intact ships were rare. Most had been cannibalized years ago. This one must have been buried until recent dust storms had uncovered it. The ship bore no corporate insignia, probably a mercenary vessel. Then, Jax made his way down carefully, testing each step. Proximity mines were still an occasional hazard, though their batteries typically failed after a decade or so. The dropship's rear loading ramp had been sheared off, creating a jagged entrance into darkness. He activated his shoulder lamp and drew his cutter, a repurposed mining tool that could slice through most metals. The beam cut through the gloom, revealing an interior coated with dust but otherwise preserved. 6 crash seats lined each wall, all empty. Storage compartments hung open, long since emptied of anything valuable. But in the rear compartment, something gleamed. Jax approached cautiously. A weapons locker had burst open during the crash, spilling its contents. Most were broken beyond recognition, but one item stood intact, a full suit of combat armor. Not just any armor. This was a mercenary exoframe, sleek and deadly, with reinforced joints and integrated weapon systems. The plating was black with red accents, the mark of an elite unit, even damaged. It would be worth a month's salvage. Jackpot, Jax breathed, holstering his cutter. He knelt to examine it. The armor was remarkably intact, missing only its helmet. A designation was stenciled across the chest plate, RT-7. As his fingers traced the insignia, something inside the armor hummed to life. An auxiliary power cell, triggered by touch. A hollow projector in the chest plate sputtered weakly, trying to form an image that collapsed in a shower of corrupted data. "Not completely dead," Jax murmured. The tech inside would double the armor's value. He started gathering the pieces, loading them into his salvage pack. Put it back. The voice was female, gravelly, as if rarely used. It came from the shadows behind him. Jax froze, hand instinctively moving toward the cutter on his belt. I wouldn't, the voice continued. Put it back, or you're next. Slowly, Jax turned. A figure stood in the doorway of the dropship, silhouetted against the dying daylight. He couldn't make out features, only that she was tall, lean, and held something that looked very much like a military-grade pulse rifle. This is my find, he said, trying to keep his voice steady. Salvage law. Doesn't apply to that armor. The figure stepped forward, just enough for Jax's lamp to catch her face. Weather-beaten, scarred across one cheek, with eyes so cold they seemed to reflect no light. Last warning. Jax weighed his options. The woman was blocking the only exit. Even if he could draw his cutter before she fired, the pulse rifle would reduce him to atoms. But the armor represented survival, real credits, maybe enough to get off this dust-choked planet. Why do you want it? He stalled, slowly shifting his weight, calculating angles. Not your concern. Seems like it is. If you're threatening to kill me over it, his eyes darted around the ship's interior, seeking another way out. The woman adjusted her aim. 5 seconds. Jax made his decision. He kicked his lamp toward her face and dove for a collapsed section of the ship's hull, a small rupture he'd noticed earlier. The pulse rifle discharged, superheating the air where he'd stood a moment before. He squeezed through the opening, metal edges tearing at his clothes, and rolled into the dust outside. Gunfire erupted behind him as he sprinted across the junkyard, zigzagging between piles of debris. The armor clanked heavily in his pack, slowing him down, but he refused to abandon it. Night was falling quickly now, and the woman would have trouble tracking him in the darkness. After 20 minutes of hard running, Jax collapsed behind the rusted hulk of a battle tank, lungs burning. No footsteps followed. He'd lost her, at least for now. But she'd know his face, and Valtara's settlements were few and far between. He couldn't go back to his usual haunts. He opened his pack and examined his prize. The armor gleamed dully in the last light of day. It was designed to fit over a pressure suit, with flexible joints and reinforced plating. Military grade, not the mass-produced stuff corporations handed out to their security forces. This was custom work for elite mercenaries. As he turned the chest plate over, he noticed a small access panel beneath the shoulder joint. Inside was a data port, standard configuration for logging mission parameters and biometric data. If he could access those logs, he might learn why the woman was so desperate to recover it. Night had fully descended by the time Jax reached the outskirts of Settlement Hall, a ramshackle collection of prefab shelters and repurposed shipping containers housing about 300 souls. He avoided the main entrance and its security scanners, instead slipping through a maintenance tunnel he'd discovered months ago. He headed not to his own quarters, but to a cramped workshop in the industrial sector. The door was unmarked except for a small circuit board symbol etched into the metal. Jax knocked 3 times, paused, then twice more. The door slid open to reveal a cluttered space filled with dismantled electronics. A short, wiry man with augmented eyes glanced up from a workbench. Jax, thought you weren't due till Rex Circuit Cade stopped mid-sentence when he saw the armor components. His augmented eyes whirred, scanning. Where'd you find Red Talon gear? Jax set down his pack. Red Talon, that's what RT stands for. Yeah, one of the elite merc units during the wars, corporate cleaners, specialized in making problems disappear. Circuit's expression darkened. Nasty reputation. Someone's hunting me for it. Circuit whistled. Not surprised, their gear was proprietary, integrated neural links, combat data recorders, the works. He gestured to his workbench. Let's have a look, then. Jax laid out the armor pieces while Circuit connected a diagnostic tablet to the data port. Lines of code scrolled across the screen. Heavy encryption, Circuit muttered. Military grade. But there's something odd. Parts of the system are still active, running on auxiliary power. He tapped commands into the tablet. I can maybe access the surface logs, but the deeper files will take time. How much time? Days. Maybe, unless... Circuit rummaged through a drawer and produced a small crystal chip. This is a corporate security bypass. Expensive, illegal, and I've been saving it for something special. He grinned. Want to see what's so important about your find? Jax nodded, though unease churned in his stomach. Whatever information the armor contained had nearly gotten him killed once already. Circuit inserted the chip. The tablet's screen flickered, then filled with data. We're in. Basic system access. Anyway. His augmented eyes narrowed as he scanned the information. Let's see. Last registered user, Sergeant M. Voss. Red Talon Special Operations. Status, terminated. Terminated. Like fired? Like dead. Or supposed to be. Circuit continued reading. This is weird. There's a conflict in the logs. The official record says Sergeant Voss died during Operation Blackfall, but the armor's internal recorder logged her vital signs for 3 days after that. Jax felt a chill that had nothing to do with the night air. What was Operation Blackfall? Circuit's fingers flew across the screen. Not much here. Classified operation on Valtara's southern continent, approximately 50 years ago. Target designation, Dissident Civilian Enclave. Orders came directly from... He trailed off, eyes widening. Holy shit. What? Orders came from Corwood Consolidated's Board of Directors. Direct corporate involvement. That wasn't supposed to happen. They always maintained plausible deniability through the Merc units. He looked up at Jax. This is evidence of direct corporate war crimes. The workshop door exploded inward. Jax threw himself sideways as armored figures poured through the opening. Weapons raised. Circuit wasn't fast enough. A neural disruptor caught him in the chest, and he collapsed, body convulsing. Jax drew his cutter and slashed at the nearest attacker, the superheated edge slicing through armor plating. The mercenary screamed and fell back. Jax kicked over a shelving unit, sending equipment crashing down to block the path, then bolted for the rear exit. Gunfire erupted behind him, pulses of energy scorching the walls. He burst through the back door into an alley, only to find himself staring down the barrel of a pulse rifle. The woman from the dropship stood before him, her scarred face impassive. End of the line, she said. Jax tensed, preparing for death. Instead, she lowered her weapon slightly. They're coming for both of us now, she said. You activated the armor's beacon when you accessed the logs. Beyond her, Jax could hear shouts as the mercenaries reorganized to pursue. Why aren't you killing me? Because you might be useful. She gestured with the rifle. Move. I know a place they won't follow. With no better options. Jax followed her through a maze of alleyways, eventually reaching an abandoned water reclamation plant on the settlement's edge. Inside, massive filtration tanks loomed like sleeping beasts. Who are you? Jax demanded once they were hidden inside a control room. You accessed the logs. You tell me. The realization hit him. Sergeant M. Voss. But you're supposed to be dead. That was the idea. She set down her rifle and began checking the perimeter. Red Talon erased me when I refused to follow orders. Operation Blackfall. Her face hardened. Yes. What happened? Mira was silent for a long moment, staring at nothing. We were sent to eliminate a settlement of political dissidents, scientists, journalists, educators who had evidence of corporate atrocities. Standard intimidation operation, we thought. She met his eyes. But when we arrived, it wasn't a military target, just families, children. Our orders were to leave no witnesses, make it look like an industrial accident. Jax felt sick. And you refused. I and 2 others from my squad. The rest followed orders. Her voice was flat, emotionless. The 3 of us were marked for termination. I'm the only one who escaped. I've been hunting for evidence ever since. Proof that the orders came from the top. And the armor contains that proof. She nodded. My squad's armor recorded everything, including the direct order transmission from Core Ward's board. I've been tracking pieces for decades. Yours is the last component I need. If you've been looking for so long, why threaten me? Why not just explain? Mira's laugh was bitter. Trust died with everyone in that settlement. Besides, people who help me tend to disappear. Before Jax could respond, an alarm blared from a device on Mira's belt. They found us. We need to move. Wait. Jax held up a hand. Your friend, Circuit. We can't just leave him. He's either dead or being interrogated. Either way, he's beyond our help. No. Jax stood firm. He's the only friend I have on this rock. We're getting him out. Mira studied him, then nodded curtly. Fine, but first, we need the armor. Where is it? Hidden. I stashed the pack before they attacked. He'd wedged it into a ventilation shaft outside Circuit's workshop, an old smuggler's trick. Then that's our first stop. Mira checked her weapon. If we're caught, they'll erase us both. Understand? Jax thought of the life he'd built on Valtara. Lonely, aimless, surviving day to day. He thought of Circuit, the only person who'd shown him kindness without asking questions about his past. He thought of the settlement Mira had tried to save, of families who had been silenced. Let's go, he said. They moved through Settlement 12's industrial sector like ghosts, avoiding patrols of both local security and the more heavily armed mercenaries. Jax led them through maintenance tunnels and waste disposal chutes until they reached Circuit's workshop from below. The building was dark, surrounded by security drones. Jax pointed to a small grate near the foundation. The ventilation shaft. The armor's inside, about 3 meters in. Mira produced a small device that emitted a pulse, temporarily disabling the nearest drone. They had seconds before its backup systems engaged. She pried open the grate while Jax kept watch. Got it, she whispered, pulling out his salvage pack. They retreated into the tunnels just as alarms began to sound above. Mira led them deeper into the maintenance system, eventually emerging in what appeared to be a security office. 2 guards lay unconscious on the floor. Your work? Jax asked. I've been planning this for a long time. She accessed a terminal, bringing up internal security feeds. Your friend is in holding cell 3, still alive. The footage showed Circuit strapped to an interrogation chair, face bruised but conscious. A man in tactical gear stood over him, asking questions they couldn't hear. Mira zoomed in on the interrogator. Lieutenant Corps, Red Talon's second in command now. You know him? He was in my squad. Her voice held no emotion. He followed orders. Jax studied the security layout. There are at least 8 guards between us and the cells. 9, Mira corrected. Plus whatever backup they can call, we'll need a diversion. She emptied the salvage pack, laying out the armor components. With practiced hands, she began assembling them, connecting power couplings and data lines. This armor has a failsafe I installed before I deserted. When fully activated, it broadcasts all stored data on an emergency frequency. Range is limited, but it would draw them away from the cells. Jax finished. Exactly, she continued working. But we'll need to place it somewhere they'll respond to immediately. Jax thought for a moment. The settlement's communication hub. If the armor broadcasts from there, the signal would reach the entire region. Mira nodded approvingly. Bold. I'll set the armor. You get your friend? No. Jax shook his head. I don't know the security systems like you do. You get Circuit. I'll place the armor. She hesitated. then reached into her pocket and produced a small data crystal. Take this. Insert it into the armor's primary port before activation. It contains everything I've gathered over the years. Names, dates, coordinates of mass graves. The complete record. Jax accepted the crystal, understanding its weight. How long will the broadcast last? Minutes at most before they shut it down. But that's enough. Once the data is out, it can't be contained. She met his eyes. If you don't make it back, I'll make it, he interrupted. She handed him a small remote. This will activate the broadcast sequence. Green button when the armor is in position. Red to detonate the emergency charges. Detonate. The armor has explosive fail-safes. Last resort. Her expression was unreadable. Don't use it unless absolutely necessary. The blast radius is significant. Jax nodded, tucking the remote away. Meet at the east gate in 30 minutes? 30 minutes, she agreed. If either of us doesn't show, the other doesn't wait. They parted ways in the maintenance tunnels, each with their mission. Jax carried the assembled armor, now humming with restored power, through rarely used corridors. The communications hub was in the settlement's central tower, heavily guarded but accessible through service ducts if you knew the way. He was halfway there when an alarm blared throughout the settlement, not the scattered alerts from before, but a full lockdown siren. Mira must have made her move. Jax increased his pace, using the confusion to his advantage. Guards rushed past his hiding spots, heading toward the detention area. He reached the base of the communications tower and found the maintenance access he'd used once before when he'd needed to intercept a corporate transmission. The climb was arduous with the armor strapped to his back, but he reached the hub level without detection. The room beyond the service panel was mercifully empty. The technicians had likely been called to address the security breach. Jax set up the armor in the center of the room, propping it against a console to make it appear as if someone were wearing it. He inserted Mira's data crystal into the port beneath the shoulder joint. The armor hummed louder, systems fully engaging. As he reached for the remote, the door slid open. Lieutenant Kor stood in the doorway, pulse pistol aimed at Jax's head. Blood stained his tactical uniform, not his own. "Step away from the armor," Kor ordered. Jax slowly raised his hands, the remote concealed in his palm. "Where's Mira?" A flicker of emotion crossed Kor's face. "So she did find you. Sergeant Voss always was persistent." "Did you kill her?" Kor's jaw tightened. "She didn't give me a choice, just like she's not giving you one now." He stepped further into the room, keeping his weapon trained on Jax. "You have no idea what you're interfering with. The peace we've maintained. Peace built on massacres," Jax spat. "On erasing people who knew too much. Necessary sacrifices for stability." Kor's voice held conviction. "The corporations brought order to the systems. Without them, we'd still be fighting planetary wars, dying by the millions instead of the thousands. Tell that to the families you murdered." Kor's expression hardened. "That operation was regrettable, but I followed orders. Preserved the greater peace." He gestured with his weapon. "The remote. Now." Jax glanced at the armor, then back at Kor. "You know what this will broadcast. Every atrocity, every corporate executive who gave the orders, your entire career built on genocide. It would destabilize everything. Reignite conflicts we've spent decades containing." Kor took another step forward. "The remote. Last warning." In that moment, Jax saw his choices with perfect clarity. He could surrender, preserve his life, return to his existence of quiet desperation, or he could finish what Mira had started, expose the truth, whatever the cost. His thumb hovered over the remote. "Mira's dead, isn't she?" Kor's silence was answer enough. "Did she say anything at the end?" A muscle in Kor's jaw twitched. "She said I'd have to live with my choices. that the truth doesn't stay buried. His finger tensed on the trigger. "Don't make me kill you too." "Someone has to live with the consequences," Jax said quietly, and pressed the green button. The armor erupted with light, a holographic display projecting from its chest plate. Faces appeared, corporate executives in boardrooms, giving explicit orders for civilian exterminations. Coordinates of mass graves flashed alongside body counts, names of those responsible, dates of operations, financial transactions authorizing mercenary actions. Core fired, but Jax had already dived aside. The blast hit a console, showering the room with sparks. Jax rolled behind a server bank as more shots punched through the metal near his head. "It's too late," he called out. "The broadcast is active. Every settlement on Valtara is receiving this, and none of them will live to share it." Core snarled, advancing. A sudden explosion rocked the tower, not from Core's weapon, but from somewhere below. The floor trembled. Emergency sirens wailed. Core stumbled, momentarily distracted, and Jax seized his chance. He lunged from cover, tackling the lieutenant. They crashed into a console, wrestling for control of the pulse pistol. Core was stronger, enhanced by military augmentations, but Jax fought with the desperation of a man with nothing left to lose. The pistol discharged, the energy pulse scorching the ceiling. Jax slammed Core's arm against the edge of a console. Once, twice, until the weapon clattered to the floor. Core responded with a savage blow to Jax's ribs, driving the breath from his lungs. As they struggled, the armor continued its broadcast, filling the room with evidence of atrocities. Faces of the dead appeared alongside those who had ordered their executions. Corporate logos flashed beside death tolls. Another explosion shook the building. Closer this time, the lights flickered, plunging the room into momentary darkness before emergency systems engaged. "Red Talon is finished," Jax gasped as Core pinned him against a wall. "The corporations can't bury this again." Core's hands closed around Jax's throat. "They've buried worse." Through darkening vision, Jax saw the armor's broadcast beginning to falter, power failing or signal being jammed. His hand fumbled for the remote, finding the red button beneath his thumb. "Not this time," he choked out, and pressed it. Core's eyes widened in realization. He released Jax and lunged for the armor, but it was too late. The fail-safe charges detonated with a concussive blast that threw both men across the room. Consoles erupted in flames, and the communications equipment amplified the signal in one massive burst before failing. Jax lay on the floor, ears ringing, vision blurred. Smoke filled the room, making it impossible to see more than a few feet. He tasted blood, felt the burn of broken ribs with each breath. But the broadcast had gone out, Mira's final message, impossible to contain now that it had reached every receiver on the planet. Through the smoke, he saw Core crawling toward him, face blackened, uniform smoldering. The lieutenant's expression held not rage but something more complex. Resignation. Perhaps even relief. "You've doomed us all," Core said, voice barely audible above the alarms. "Or saved us," Jax replied. Core stared at him for a long moment, then collapsed, unconscious or dead. Jax couldn't tell and hadn't the strength to check. The room was becoming an inferno. Consoles melting, ceiling panels crashing down. With monumental effort, Jax dragged himself toward the maintenance shaft. Each movement was agony, but the alternative was certain death. He reached the opening and pulled himself inside, inch by excruciating inch, as the communications hub disintegrated behind him. The descent was a blur of pain and determination. He emerged at the tower's base amid chaos, security forces shouting contradictory orders, civilians running in panic, smoke billowing from multiple sections of the settlement. The broadcast had done more than expose the truth. It had shattered the carefully maintained order. Jax staggered through the confusion, heading for the east gate where he'd promised to meet Mira. He knew she wouldn't be there, but something compelled him onward, a promise kept, even if only to a memory. The gate was unmanned, guards having abandoned their posts to address the greater crisis. Beyond lay the endless scrapyards, the dust now glowing orange from fires within the settlement. Jax collapsed against the wall, strength finally failing. "You're late," the voice came from the shadows. Jax turned his head, certain he was hallucinating. Mira stepped into view, clutching her side where blood seeped through makeshift bandages. Behind her stood Circuit, his face bruised but very much alive. "You're dead," Jax said stupidly. Not for lack of trying on Kor's part. She nodded toward Circuit. "Found your friend. Had to improvise." Circuit grinned despite his injuries. "She blew up half the detention block. It was beautiful." "The broadcast?" Mira asked, her voice betraying the first hint of emotion Jax had heard from her. "It went out. All of it." Jax coughed, tasting more blood. "The armor's destroyed." Mira closed her eyes briefly. "Good. That's good." When she opened them again, there was something new there. Purpose. Perhaps even hope. "Can you walk?" Jax tried to stand. Failed. "Not far." "Then we'll carry you." Circuit moved to his side, offering support. "There's a relief outpost in the foothills. They'll have medical supplies." "And then?" Jax asked. Mira looked back at the settlement, now in full revolt as civilians processed the revelations about their corporate overseers. "Then we make sure the truth spreads beyond Valtara." The broadcast was just the beginning, as they helped him through the gate. Jax thought of the life he'd lived before, the careful anonymity, the purposeless survival. For the first time in decades, he felt something like direction. The dust swirled around them as they made their way into the darkness. Three figures bound together not by choice, but by consequence, by truth too long buried. Behind them, the settlement burned, a pyre for secrets finally exposed. Ahead lay uncertainty, danger, but also possibility. Valtara's endless dust storms would continue, but now they might finally begin to clear. 2 weeks later, Jax stood on a ridge overlooking what remained of Settlement Wall. The fires had eventually burned themselves out, leaving blackened structures amid the ever-present dust. But unlike before, the settlement buzzed with activity, not just survival, but purpose. News of the broadcast had spread planet-wide, then system-wide. Corporate damage control had attempted to dismiss the evidence as fabricated, but too many had seen the faces, heard the orders, recognized the names of disappeared loved ones. Inquiries had been launched, first locally, then across former war zones. Corporate executives were facing extradition requests. Military archives, long sealed, were being opened. "Ready?" Mira appeared beside him, her wounds healing but still evident in her careful movements. Jax nodded. Circuit has the transport prepped. They had spent the fortnight recovering, planning, gathering allies. The relief outpost had become a nexus for others seeking justice. Former soldiers with their own secrets to tell. Civilians who had lost families. Data specialists who could follow the money trails exposed in the broadcast. "We'll reach the Corwood archives in 3 days," Mira said. "Their security will be enhanced since the broadcast." But not enough. Circuit joined them, carrying equipment packs. Their encryption was designed to keep out competition, not determined idealists with insider knowledge. He grinned at Mira. "No offense." "None taken." She turned to Jax. "Last chance to back out. What comes next will be dangerous." Jax looked out over the settlement, then up at the dust-filled sky. Somewhere beyond that perpetual haze lay other worlds, other cover-ups waiting to be exposed, other people carrying the weight of enforced silence. "I spent too long salvaging scrap," he said. Time to build something instead. They descended the ridge together. 3 figures soon lost in the swirling dust, not erased, but temporarily obscured, moving with purpose toward a future they would help create. One buried truth at a time. Behind them, in what remained of the communications tower, the last fragments of a mercenary's armor lay melted among the ruins. Its purpose fulfilled, its message delivered, its burden finally laid down.